Okay, stop. Marissa. Your fun name tag. Motor unit recruitment. What did Aaron or Insia tell you motor unit recruitment was?
Oh, we said that it starts out with the smallest, muscle fiber, like type 1, and then after it, needs more force, it like continues to actually until it recruits the next motor unit,
Okay,
until it has enough force production.
okay. All very, very good and correct information. That's probably 2 steps beyond even what I was asking. It's most basic. What does it mean to recruit a motor unit? Nathan, recruit a motor unit. You don't have to explain it. Show me recruitment of a motor unit. Okay, you're doing a muscle. So what has to happen? At the level of the motor neuron, what has to happen? To initiate recruitment. Action, where does, okay, great. That action potential does what to the motor neuron? It depolarizes. Okay. So remember, and all the things that Marissa that they said is 100% right. That's the next thing that happens. When we talk about recruitment, I need force production. The first thing that I have to do, right, is polarize a motor neuron. Then I can send more than one action potential to keep it depolarizing and alter its firing. Then I can figure out, once it depolarizes, how many fibers is it going to go to, right? How large is that motor unit? And then if I need more, I get a second motor neuron and a third and a fourth and a fifth and all of those things. Okay. That's recruitment. If we care about how strong you are, okay, how big are your muscles, how good are you at recruiting the muscle that you have, okay? How good are you at recruiting the muscle that you have? It's easy to look at someone and see how big their muscles are, okay? If we want to know who's the best person in the room at recruiting their motor units, what questions should we ask them? How much can you lift? That's a reasonable thing, but it's probably not the best thing, Joe. Sorry, I have a weird eye thing. Now, you think, what should you ask? I forgot who's next to us. What should you ask? I guess Landon, I'm forgetting who's Shelby. What should you ask Shelby to know if she is better or worse than Landon at doing motor unit recruiting? Ask about their training stats. Perfect. Okay, perfect. How big are your muscles? And then if you train that muscle more often, especially if you train it going to failure or lifting something that is pretty heavy, that helps us get better at this. That helps us get all the way down in our graph to this last group of motor units. Okay. If you don't use a muscle very often, okay, depending upon the muscle group, in large muscles like say your quads, a person that is basically completely untrained from a resistance training standpoint, if you ask them to do a squat or you ask them to do a knee extension, they're only going to be able to turn on to about right here. That last 15 or 20% of their motor neurons, they're not yet able, even though they exist and they connect to muscle fibers, they can't recruit them. That's part of the reason why they're not as strong as they potentially could be. Okay. We'll see when we do resistance training. As soon as you start training, which I'll make a joke about myself again, I did, which is what the old people do. I did 1 set of 10 reps to failure on like 7 different exercises on Monday, which is the first time that I've done any kind of resistance training in, I don't know, since like June or something, which speaks volumes about the awfulness of my life. And that one session, if I'm here, I can now get to about here. Okay, you get better at doing this immediately. Okay, when you do training. Okay, so that's what's going on with recruit. Okay, that's why it's so important for determining horse production. Okay, question? Yes.
So Professor, how are the kids so strong then? Are they like maximizing? what they're
Yes.
doing?
It's helpful to be just have a lot of muscle. It helps to be big. It helps to be really, really good at being able to essentially recruit all of the fibers that you have. And then powerlifting is a whole separate thing that's gonna actually tie into a couple of the things we're gonna talk about the rest of today. But then there's also a unique ability to go fast, right? And generate as much force as you can quickly. All right, so speed of contraction also is gonna play a bit of a role. Okay, that's a good question. Okay. All right. Before we talk about the effects of velocity, we'll do what I would call in some ways kind of the third thing that's going to contribute to overall horse production. Okay. And I don't know if you guys have seen this particular way of looking at things before, but I'm gonna show you this. And I want you to understand what it is and how it goes. And then I'm basically gonna tell you, okay, that while I want you to know what it is, this, what we have in front of you here, and you're probably like, well, then why the hell are you teaching this, Dr. Black? Doesn't actually play much of a role in what goes on in you guys, okay? And I'll explain why that is, but I think it's important to understand the general concept, because it's gonna show us some things about cross bridges and sarcomeres that are going to go on, okay? So these are some data from a study published in 1966. And it is describing something that we call the muscle or skeletal muscle, or it's really the sarcomere, okay, length tension relationship. Okay. And so what you see down here in the bottom panel, this is what's happening at 2 thin filaments and 1 thick filament inside of a sarcomere. Okay, myosin heads, actin molecules here. Okay, and what you can see basically, the little sort of vertical line on the end is the Z line. That's the edge of one sarcomere. And what these folks did was they cut out muscle fibers, they dissected them down into kind of individual things, and they're measuring, okay, the distance between the Z lines in a sarcomere. And they are stretching out one sarcomere or they're squishing it together. Okay. So what you see at the very, very top is a overly stretched out sarcomere. And what you see at the bottom is a sarcomere that has shortened, and the actin and myosin have pulled past each other as far as they can go. So very long sarcomere length, shortest possible sarcomere length. And you will note, if you really care, what you can see is this is like 3.65 micrometers, and this is about 1 micrometer. Those numbers, you don't have to know them. They don't mean anything of real import for us. Okay, but what you can see, and what I hope you can see from this, is at very long sarcomere lengths, if I pull them out far enough, I will basically stretch the actin molecules away from the myosin so they can't contact each other. So you cannot get actin and myosin. We call it overlap. There's no overlap of actin and myosin. Okay, it's me reaching towards Stacy, but I can't reach him. I want to form a cross bridge, but I can't reach. I'm too far away. So if I can't form a cross bridge, how much force am I going to get from that sarcomere? Very little. Okay, very, very little. And so that is out here. What you see in this graph is percentage of maximal force that can be generated. This is length of the striation, or this is the sarcomere length. So out here on the right-hand side of the top graph corresponds to the top right here. Very long lengths, I have essentially no force. Okay. Similarly, at very, very short lengths, everything slides past, they bump into each other, and we can get a little bit of force, but not very much down here as well. So we're at these very, very short ones. So we need an ability to get actin and myosin to overlap with each other and have some ability to kind of move and maintain those things. And so when you look in the middle, when we do have some overlap, we get a curve that looks like this, okay? At very short lengths, less force. As we move towards these kind of moderate middle lengths, force goes up, it reaches some maximum, and then as we stretch it out, we lose overlap, and the force will fall back down. So this is called the sarcomere length tension relationship. Okay, and from all of this, we can find some optimal length for a sarcomere to generate force. There's some optimal amount of overlap in a sarcomere of actin and myosin to maximize cross-bridge formation and therefore maximize force production. Okay. Okay. Now, everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. Give yourself just a little bit of room. I'll do it with you. I want my stretchy dress pants. Okay, now, if you guys had guess, if we had to guess, in my quads, we're gonna do a squat, in my quads right now, as we're standing with our legs straight, are my quads shortened, lengthened, or somewhere in between? Short, okay, short. Now, everybody down into a squat, okay, down. Okay, down. Are we were short, what are we now? Long, down as far as you can reasonably go. Now back up, stop in the middle, okay? You didn't realize this was gonna be boot camp class, right? In the middle now, where am I? Somewhere in the middle, okay, up and rest for just a second. If I ask you, through that whole range of motion, where are you the strongest? Here? Here? Or here? What was there? I don't know which one was it. I was in the middle. Do we all agree with that? Are you stronger in the middle than you are at very long lengths? Yeah, you guys ever remember actually doing a squat with a barbell and things, right? If you can get past the bottom and get your started back up, is that where you fail? Is it the very, very bottom? Is it easier to not go down as far? Okay. You can't generate a whole lot here because of just the way the joints are, but there. Might that through a range of motion, short, moderate, long, if I ask you to do strength, might it look like this? It does. Okay, it does. But it's not because of this. Okay, and this is the confusing part of all this. Y'all can sit down. If we go from short, moderate, long muscle length, most of us, think about it with your bicep, long, moderate, short. Are you weaker out here than you are in the middle? Of course you are. Okay. Here, a little bit less, so even more. It looks a lot like this. And if you would think, oh, well, when here I lengthened the muscle, did I stretch my sarcomeres all the way out? Is that why I'm weaker down here? Because I'm losing sarcomere overlap. A very plausible thing, and it tracks like this, but it's completely wrong. Okay? It's completely wrong. This is real, and this happens, and I want you to understand it because it helps you to understand how we get force production from cross bridges. But this, in most human muscles, the vast majority of your sarcomeres, no matter where you are in a range of motion, are about right here. You're somewhere in that middle 20% of length. So when you do a bicep curl and you go all the way down, the muscle lengthens your sarcomeres lengthen a little bit, but they don't actually lengthen very much. As it shortens, they shorten a little bit, but they don't actually shorten, the sarcomeres themselves don't move that much. A lot of the movement there is due to the elastic properties of connective tissue and the tendons and those. In most muscles, we are not ever going to get very far off of about 75 or 80% of our maximal tension capacity in the sarcomere. Okay, and yet you guys are all right? Weaker at long lengths, weaker at very short lengths, stronger in the middle. The question then is why? If it's not because of this, what else changes? Okay, anybody want to guess? What else changes as I go from here down to the bottom and back up? Velocity. We're going to get to that one, Stacy. That's right. And that does play a very key role. Movement makes me get a little bit less force than I would isometrically. What else changes? Torque. What is this torque of which you speak? Somebody define torque. Brandon's doing things up here like
Rotational force.
rotational force. Okay. How might I calculate rotational force? Who's had biomechanics? Anybody have biomechanics? Okay. Christina is hoping you remember things right now.
Distance times force applied, like distance from the origin to the middle times the force applied.
Okay. What is that? Y'all remember what is that distance? Right? It's like a seesaw, right? But that distance to the axis of rotation, you guys remember there's a specific term for that. Seesaw, you're sitting out here, so this distance is called something. In a seesaw, it's a lever arm. In you guys, it's what we call a moment arm. Okay, in your joints, it's called a moment arm. Y'all are looking at me like I'm speaking gibberish. Okay, I didn't teach y'all about moment arms in anatomy. Seriously? No, are you kidding me? Oh, I gotta call Cindy. Okay. we gotta have a conversation. Okay. Then Brandon's right. So as I do this, right, my elbow wants to turn about an axis right here. Okay. I have a tendon, they tell me, that comes down and crosses that joint and actually hooks on down here. So when my bicep generates force, it pulls on a tendon on this side of my elbow, and it's trying to pull my arm up like this. Okay. So the distance from where that tendon inserts down here to the axis, that distance is called a moment arm. Okay. Same thing in my knee. The patella tendon comes over, right, and it hooks on down here on your tibia. And so the distance from there to the axis of rotation in your knee, that's also a moment arm. Okay. We're not going to talk about that these are, I think, like second-class levers or something. We're very inefficient. Your bicep actually generates way more force than what you actually are applying on the bone because it inserts on the opposite side of the joint. It's very inefficient. But this distance, right, is called a moment arm. And so torque, right? Torque is something that is the angular movement, the angular analog of force production. Okay, that's what torque is. And so torque, we express torque as something called a Newton meter rather than a pound or a Newton, but it's basically the force the muscle in the cross bridges generates multiplied by the moment arm that goes across that particular joint. Okay, and that gives us torque. When you move, all you're doing is generating force. Okay, we talk a lot about force production. You're going to look at weights and you think, okay, I can squat 400 pounds or I can curl 100 pounds, whatever that is. What that really needs to be, though, is you have an ability to apply muscular force across a joint, multiply that by that moment arm, and these two things together give us a torque that lets us overcome gravity. Okay, and so the weird thing that happens is as you move through a range of motion, is the distance from the insertion of the tendon to the axis of rotation actually changes. Okay, so as I move through this, okay, that distance that is the moment arm gets bigger and smaller. And across motion joints, it is smallest at very short lengths and smallest at very long lengths and largest somewhere in the middle. So the muscle generates the exact same amount of force. It's just what gets applied across the joint is going to change. My bicep is however big it is. I can recruit however many motor neurons as I can on this. I can drive them at a certain firing rate. But if I go from here to here, I manipulate the moment arm and I change how much the actual amount of that force that gets transferred across the joint. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? And so this is why, if we look at, here's sarcomere length, this is the effective lever arm, it does a thing like this, okay? Torque is gonna do a thing like this is knee joint angle, and part of what we can't get is that they didn't go out far enough, it can come back down a little bit more so, but it works in the same manner, okay? Functionally, we don't really talk about a length tension relationship. We call this, some people call it in vivo, so it's in an intact animal length tension. It's probably better characterized as the torque joint angle relationship. Okay, at 180 degrees out here versus 90 degrees versus like 20 degrees or something up here, however you want to define that range of motion, we're going to have a different application of the force that's going to go on. And all this means is that as you move through a range of motion, your strength changes. The amount of force that you can apply is sort of the torque that you can apply changes. So if you go to lift weights, okay, one of all of this is going to be the thing that determines how strong you are. Sir, yes,
How much weight you can lift through that strongest range of motion, like
to the strong,
like that optimal range. of motion.
okay, is you're really close, like you're thinking about it the right way, but is the amount of weight that I can squat determined by what I can do here, okay, in the middle, or something else? Because this is my strongest part, right? But I mean, we probably all, I don't know, it's Wednesday, the bros probably still aren't squatting this week. The bros probably never squat. I was impressed. I went on Monday and there was not every bench was being used. There were a lot of curls being done on Monday. But if it's not here, what is it? And you wanted to offer? It's at the weakest. Okay? You are only as strong as the amount of torque you can generate at the weakest point in a range of motion. You can, if you're going to do a squat where you go all the way down to very long lengths, you're only going to be able to move whatever you can do and move at the very, very bottom, the very longest joint angle. Okay? Because once you can clear that part, then the middle part is easy because you're going to get more force production. Okay? So we've got to be careful about all. This is the application of how big is my muscle, how much can I recruit, but we also have to care about what is the range of motion. Okay, what is the range of motion? You guys should have learned in principles of health and fitness, but also if you've had personal training or even maybe in testing prescription, when we do a 1 rep max assessment, when we try to find what it is, one of the things you have to talk about, you have to define the range of motion. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to do a curl where they start all the way down at full extension? Or do you want them to start in the middle? Okay? Where do we want them to be because those are gonna give us very different joint angles, very different moment arms, and very different amounts of torque that we can generate. Okay? So if you do a kind of full, what we normally think of as a full range of motion on things, you're only as strong as the weakest point, which tends in most functional things to be at the longest muscle length. Okay? In a range of motion. Does that make sense? Okay, but are you beginning to see how, right, muscle size matters, my ability to recruit matters, that those get laid over the top now of these other parameters and things that we have to have when we start actually moving and doing things. It's one thing for me to take an animal and cut a muscle out of it and hook it up to things in the lab and test it, and I can figure out, okay, well, it's this and it's this. But when we move, when we do things, okay, we have to consider what's my joint? Where am I going? How is all of this going to happen? Okay? This is really, really important from a rehabilitative standpoint or from a training standpoint, right? Maybe we need to train at longer lengths because that's where I'm the weakest, right? I need to work on the weakest point in my range of motion in some ways, that maybe that's the limiting factor. Okay, or maybe you've got someone who's old like me and I can't move through a full range of motion. Okay, remind me on Friday and I'll tell you why I think stretching is dumb. For you guys, I hate stretching. Stretching's dumb. It doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't prevent injuries or anything else, but it's good for people like me because I'm now old enough that I can't actually move in all of that. You want to stretch, you're gonna be more flexible. It's great. It's wonderful. My wife used to be a gymnast and a dancer, and she can like curl herself up into a pretzel still at 46 years old. And it works for her now. And I'm like, I can't even bend over and touch my fucking toes. Okay. That's a problem. But for most people, right? Because now I can't get through a full range of motion. I can't apply the force that I need to if I need to run or walk or pick a giant toddler up and those kinds of things. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. I told y'all that our daughter is a giant. Have we talked about this at all? I'm 5'10". My wife is, she says she's 5'4". She's 5'3". We are basically right at the 50th percentile in like height for adults. Okay. Our daughter has been in the 99th percentile in height and weight basically since the very first ultrasound that we had done, right, at like 8 weeks of my wife being pregnant. You know, from the time she was like the size of, you know, our thumbnail, they're like, oh, that's gonna be a big kid. And we're like, how? Right? You can see, right, what I look like. My wife is very fair skinned, she has red hair, freckles, lots of things. Our daughter is this giant blue-eyed, blonde-headed Viking baby, right? I don't know, right? So questions have been asked, all of the things, but she's just this giant. And we look at her and we're like, she doesn't really look like, look, where did she come from? In the midst of all of this. My brother-in-law has, my wife and I both have green eyes, but my brother-in-law has blue eyes. There's some people that have blonde hair on their side of the family, but nobody is tall. Like no one. We don't understand. So we have my wife, who was a volleyball player in high school, and so she's all excited that she's like, maybe right now by the growth chart, she'll be like I think she'll be like 5'10" or 5'11". And she's like, ooh, she might get to play in the front line if she wants to do that. She's shown no proclivity to want to do any of those kinds of things. She wants to be a princess and listen to Taylor Swift songs. Or The Descendants. You guys familiar with there's a show that's called The Descendants? I don't know. We will not let her watch it, but all we do is she tells Alexa to play the Princess Red song, just on a loop. And okay. Kids are the best, they're true. Anyway, I can't bend over to pick my giant toddler up in the midst of this, and it's now a problem. Okay, that's this. Let's do the last couple of things, okay? All right. We're gonna come back to what Stacy talked about, okay? What Stacy talked about. Should have brought some weights. I could have you guys get up and try this with your backpacks, but the other piece, okay? So how big are your muscles? How good are you at recruiting and driving firing rates? What's your joint angle? The next thing is, what's the speed or velocity of contraction? Okay, So what I'm drawing here, which I couldn't find a graph, so I had to make this myself in Excel, so I apologize, it's not as good as I would like, but I ran out of time. This is the contraction speed or the velocity and force relationship. It's often called the force velocity, okay? And so in a very, very general sense, we gotta split the force velocity relationship up into concentric or shortening contractions and eccentric or lengthening contractions, because the relationship is different. Okay, and it all comes back to what happens at the cross bridges, which I will explain. So we're gonna start off over here on the right side of this graph. Okay. The midpoint or the line here is basically, okay, zero velocity. This is an isometric contraction. I'm holding my bicep right here at 90 degrees. I'm doing nothing. There's no velocity. Okay. It's not shortening, it's not lengthening, it's isometric. I get some amount of force production. Okay. As I do then from here, as I shorten, if I shorten very slowly, okay, I'm gonna lose force compared to what I got isometric. So if I can hold 100 pounds right here, okay, as I start to slowly go through, right, the rest of that range of motion, I can't generate or I can't apply 100 pounds here. The fact to get movement, I lose force. So maybe I can only slowly move 90 pounds. Okay, here. If as velocity, as we go down here on the x-axis, this is increasing velocity, so I'm shortening at a faster and faster and faster rate. So not slow like this, faster. As I go faster and faster, I lose more and more and more force. Okay. So when we do a concentric contraction, the faster the velocity, the less force I get. Okay. The less force that I'm going to get. To go really, really, really fast, like just your arm, right? I can do this. Very fast, very spazzy. If I take this. No, this is not the best thing because it's kind of fun, but I can't go as fast. I physically, because it requires more force to lift this. I cannot go all the way out here like I could if it was unloaded in just my arm. Okay. Does that make sense, guys? Pretty straightforward. Okay. Now, going up, that's what happens. If rather than doing a shortening contraction, I do a lengthening contraction. I give you the weight and I go from isometric and I have you lower it down from there the rest of the way. As we do that, it'll look like this. As we go eccentrically, as we lengthen, not only do we not lose force, we actually get stronger. And actually generate more force doing a lengthening contraction. And for most people, probably somewhere between 10 or 15 to about 20%. And it goes up a little bit and you can go faster and faster and you're not going to get any more. It plateaus off. Okay. So we say concentric contractions, force is dependent on velocity. Faster you go, the less force you generate. Generally, we characterize eccentric contractions or lengthening contractions as being independent of velocity. It doesn't matter how fast we go, the force production is going to be roughly similar. It's going to be up a little bit from an isometric contraction, but it's mostly gonna be the same. Okay. Now the fun part. Now the why. Why is this the thing that happens? It all comes back to what happens at the cross bridge. Which is why understanding the cross bridge cycle is so important. It's why I will ask you all about the cross bridge cycle on the test. Right? Remember that force is directly related to the number of cross bridges that are engaged. Okay. So by deductive reasoning, if I get less force as I go faster, what does that tell us about the number of cross bridges that must be engaged at that particular time? There's fewer, okay? Why are there fewer cross bridges? There is less force. I get less force because there are fewer cross bridges, but why are there, when you're moving, why are there less cross bridges than there would be that are attached than there is during isometric contraction? Fatigue, that's a great guess. Early on, it's not quite right. It will happen later on. It's not momentum. It's not recruitment. Okay, we're gonna come back to that. That's really important eccentrically. It's actually not quite what happens concentrically. In order to move, and shorten, what do the cross bridges have to do? They have to disconnect and then go back, right? Kind of recock, attach again, pull, detach, go back, right? As soon as that cross bridge breaks off, what happens to force production? It's gonna go down. Let's just do an assumption that's completely wrong, but I'm doing an isometric contraction. It's as hard as I can. Every cross bridge in my bicep is connected right now. Every one of them. Completely not right, but every one of them is on, okay? In order to start actually moving, right? Some of them have to let go and go back and recock and attach again and pull and then detach and do that over and over again. So in order to actually shorten, we have to break the cross bridges apart. When they break apart, there's fewer that are attached, there's less force. To go faster, you have to break more of them at any one given moment in time. More of them have to let go so that they can then move and reattach to keep it going faster and faster and faster. And that is why on a concentric contraction, the faster you go, the less force you get. It's just that there's fewer cross bridges. When do we use ATP in the cross bridge cycle? What do we use the ATP to tell the cross bridge to do? To detach. Okay. So if I go faster, I get less force, but what happens to the amount of energy that I'm using? It goes way up. You all get this intuitively, right? Would you rather walk or run? Which one uses more energy? Running, right? Breaking cross bridges faster, same general motion. Okay. So I get less force and it costs me more energy because of what happens at the cross bridge. Okay. Because of what happens at the cross bridge. Eccentrically, if I have every cross bridge attached isometrically, there are no more that I can engage, none. How the hell am I going to get more force? Two things have to happen. I engage, right? To plausibly get not a decline in force, what has to happen to the cross bridges? Let's stay together, very good, Melinda. I don't break this. Okay, well, that at least like holds me steady. Where's the extra force coming from? You know, ladies who has a hair tie. Right. Pull out a hair tie and stretch it, and what happens? Is it gonna resist against you like a rubber band? So what happens eccentrically is the cross bridges don't break, and your ligaments and your tendons and the connective tissue has elastic properties, and they're going to try to keep from getting stretched out. So they also resist against gravity and resist against deformation. And so that lets us get a little bit of force. So as I lower it down, I have the force from my muscle, but I also have force from the connective tissue trying to not get stretched that also is going to get applied. Okay. And so for most of us, that's going to get us an extra 10 or maybe 15 or 20. So if the cross bridges don't break eccentrically, or they don't break very often, what happens to energy use? it's really low. And that's why going downstairs gets easy. And that's why running downhill feels much easier. You're just not using as much energy. Right? Does that make sense? This part of this makes sense. Okay, I'm gonna do one last thing, okay? And then I'm gonna send you guys on your way for Friday. This is gonna come back to, okay? This is gonna come back to Jerry's thing. Power. Velocity multiplied by force is a parameter called power. Okay? This is force production on the y-axis, velocity on the x-axis, the solid line is the concentric contraction. Here's force as velocity increases. Power is this dashed line. To run fast, to jump high, to knock someone over when you're playing football, whatever it is that you're doing, we need power. The application of force at high speeds. Okay? So you will look at maximum power occurs at about 1/3 of maximum velocity. This. Okay? This is what power looks like. The last thing I want to show you guys is here's the different power profiles of fast twitch and slow twitch fibers. Okay, we'll clean the last couple of 2 minutes of this up on Friday. You will not, for the test now, I will not put the sensory motor integration stuff on the test. We'll talk about it on Friday. Okay?